Hey, it's Jason from Fraser Valley Rose Farm. Today here with a quick video on the secrets of stem cuttings. And I've made a couple of other videos in the past where I've used this technique of stem cuttings both on roses and willows. And when I say secrets of this method, I don't mean that it's like trade secret or something like that. It's just the secrets to my success, the things I've done and learned over time by doing a lot of these that make me more successful at them. And the first of those secrets I'll reveal right up front is that this method, the general method of stem cuttings, whether you're talking about softwood, semi-hardwood, or hardwood stem cuttings, is all the same. Basically, you can use this method on a wide variety of plants, and it works for all of them, but you just have to tweak it a little bit based on the stage of growth, the size of the plant, and so on. Some examples of plants this works on: obviously I've mentioned roses and willows as well, and dogwoods and so on. But it works on a ton of stuff, like rhododendrons. It'll work on hydrangeas. It'll work on blueberries. Just tons of stuff. I actually brought some examples here of some things that are done by that same method. Over here, I brought Phuopsis, which is just a perennial, and the cuttings on that one are really tiny, usually taken in the softwood stage. This one here is tricolor sage, and again, a fairly short little cutting, a little tiny cutting like that. This one here is tamarix. I've got two roses here, and this rose here that was done by hardwood cuttings, you can see just white roots, beautifully rooted, looks no different than one that was done by the semi-hardwood method. And in fact, that's one of the things I wanted to reveal right up front, is that botanically, the rules are very simple. You have a node at the bottom of the cutting, you have a node at the top of the cutting, you might have one or two in between, and that's your cutting, right? So botanically speaking, there's very little difference between this little one here, I may have to focus up on that one afterwards to get you a better view, and this one here. This one taken from a small perennial, like a rosemary, and this one here taken from a grape. And you can see this one has a cut at the bottom, a cut at the top, this one below a node, this one above a node, two nodes in between. It's the same as this. They're just taken at different stages from different plants. So some of the questions that I've heard as I try to talk about this, both to garden clubs and online, is the question of, should I score the cuttings on the bottom? Now, just to explain what that means, scoring is a method where you would take a cutting like this, and at the bottom of the cutting, you would take your blade and just take a chunk out of it. And that chunk would reveal more of the cambium layer of the plant. And it's definitely something you can do to try to increase the surface area that's available to do rooting, especially if you're using rooting hormone. I don't routinely do it on most of my plants. On the roses, I do 1,000, 2,000 cuttings a year. It would just add greatly to the amount of handling time that I do on it, and I get significantly good results without doing it. But certainly, you could. And if you're having trouble with a particular variety of roses, because it is very varietal, some do very easily and some take a little bit slower or don't take at all, then you could certainly experiment with that technique. Score either one side or both sides of the bottom of the cutting before you apply the rooting hormone and see if that improves your success. Another thing that's been asked of me a number of times is, especially on hardwood cuttings, should I take a slanted cut at the top of the cutting? So should the top cut here not be flat, but rather be taken on an angle like this, preferably a clean angle like that? The answer is that method is often recommended on gardening websites to tell the difference between the bottom and the top of the cutting. It really doesn't have a lot to do with the success of the cutting. So if you can, either by eye or because you're sticking it right away, if you already know the difference between the top and the bottom, then you don't have to bother by taking a slanted cutting on the top of your cut, or on the top of your cutting. But if you are going to take a whole big batch outside of things that have no leaves on them, it's not going to be easy to tell the top from the bottom, then go ahead and make that slanted cut if it helps you to remember which is the top or the bottom. Functionally, it has no difference in whether this cutting will succeed or not. Some people have used this, what I call a little bit of suspect science of, well, if you cut it on an angle, it's going to divert the rain away from the top bud or something like that. And to me, that makes no sense at all. Every part of that plant is going to be equally wet when the rain comes down upon it, and it's going to dry at about the same rate. So I think that's nonsense, even though I've heard it in a number of places. The third thing that people sometimes ask me is about rooting hormone. And do I use it? Well, yes, I do. I find that on my rose cuttings, and that's what I cut the most of, it makes about a 10% difference in success rate. So if I don't use it, my average rate might be closer to 75%, and if I do use it, my average stick rate might be closer to 85%. And that's worth it. I mean, if you're doing 2,000 cuttings, 10% change in rate means 200 extra plants. So yeah, that's worth it. What kind of rooting hormone to use? I'm less certain about that. I'm less interested in that question. I use the one that's the most convenient for me. I use a rooting powder. And on roses, that's a semi-hardwood. I do most of mine by semi-hardwood cuttings. So I use a number 2 in stem root is the one that I use. But that brand name is going to vary from place to place. So what you want to look for is on the side of the bottle, it's going to have the indication of which kind of plant it's for. It'll say hardwood cuttings of trees and shrubs. It'll say softwood cuttings of annuals and perennials, or it'll say semi-hardwood cuttings. So that's what you're looking for, and those correspond to different rates or different concentrations of the active ingredient, which is IBA, on the side of the bottle. So that's what you're looking for. Now, as for whether you use a powder, whether you use a gel, whether you use a liquid, I don't care. The liquids are, you have to mix them as a step first. So what you do is you'd mix a small amount of the concentrate into the bottom of a cup, add some water, and then you just do a quick dip for a number of seconds based on whether it's hardwood or semi-hardwood. Sometimes it'll just be the length of the dip that varies. And that's fine. I just find it a pain to have to stop and remix something all the time. I like to have a powder that's ready to go. Also, the powder you use very little of because you can just dip it in and then knock it off the end of your cutting. So that's the way I use it. Some people use gels, and I have to say the gels are fantastic. Like I enjoy using them, but I go through them really fast because a lot of the gel sticks onto the bottom of the cutting, so you end up going through them pretty quickly. And I also don't like the idea that with the powder, you put it in, you tap it off, it feels quite sanitary. With a dip, after you've been dipping a bunch of stems into it, I feel like you may have contaminated the gel to some degree. What else am I going to talk to you about today? Temperature and kind of cutting. So that's the next thing you need to know the difference of. And I have gone over this. So if you want to learn this in a real world video about either the willows or the roses, go back to my other videos. This one here, I want to teach you the difference between a softwood, semi-hardwood, and hardwood cutting. It's hard for me to find softwood material out in the garden right now, but what you're looking at is something that bends very easily. So if you look at this one here, actually that one snapped, but this one here, if it bends like that, that's softwood. If it will bend a little, but not a whole lot, that's semi-hardwood. And if you get to the bottom of this stem here, and you're trying to bend that, and you almost can't bend it without snapping it, that's hardwood. So these are just related to different stages of growth in the plant. Softwood, you've got to imagine, is new tissue, and the cells in there are actively differentiating and they're actively growing. So if you take a softwood cutting, it should be able to root quite quickly. It will like more warmth, it will like more moisture, and it doesn't need a high level of rooting hormone for it to get done what it's doing. If you're looking at semi-hardwood, it needs a little less heat, it needs a little less moisture, it's going to take a little bit longer to root, and it needs a higher concentration of rooting hormone to get it to do that. And the hardwood cuttings on the far extreme are a little bit harder, a little less active. They need even less moisture, even less heat. Oftentimes I'd take those cuttings over winter and just let them sit for months. And they need an even higher level of rooting hormone to get them to go. Now some plants, just as a final trick I'm going to pass along to you here, some plants need no rooting hormone at all. And they can take the hormone. I just like to save myself the time. So if I'm taking cuttings on willows, I know I'm going to get 100% success rate on the willows anyway. It doesn't matter what I do in terms of rooting hormones, they're all going to get roots. It might be the same thing for buddleia or butterfly bush. I have pretty good success rate with fuchsias, which I have right here. So I sometimes use rooting hormone on that, sometimes I don't. I have a pretty good success rate with elderberry and with gooseberry. So if any of those things come across my, across my propagation table, it's like, do I have the rooting hormone handy and how much time do I have? And that's it. Otherwise, I'll stick them without the rooting hormone and I get pretty much as good success with or without. So on those ones, it might make less than a 5% difference about success rate, which on a large number might make a difference, but if I'm trying to save time and I'm doing 2 cuttings per, no big deal. All right, that is my short blurb on the secrets of stem cuttings, and I would sure appreciate it if you had any questions on stem cuttings, and this is the video to do it on. So I'd love to see if you have any questions on the specifics about species or anything else. I'll share what information I can. And thank you so much for watching today.